Hey everyone, shorter video this week, but we're still going to try to keep up with these weekly updates with the class. Practicing for the Battle Hard in Portland, so if you're going to be there, feel free to come and say hi. And this week we have a update for the Pirate class, kind of honing in on a couple things this week. Not going to go over every card that I'm making or from the past week, but general ideas. So the equipment, like what is your ideal equipment loadout? The idea is that your chest should be able to sacrifice a coin for a resource. I kind of settled somewhere in the middle. I think a gold would be too much. I think a copper would be too easy with the plunder mechanic. It just would mean that as long as you hit one person a turn, you essentially get tunic. So I think a silver is like a good middle ground where with a little bit of work, you can basically get a resource every turn, so better than tunic. Arms, like we talked about, like gambler's gloves are what I hope would be the go-to for the class. I want those arms to have a place somewhere. I think they're pretty fun for multiplayer-esque formats, things with high RNG, and I think that the brute class, like having to run those, is not exactly what I like about them. They shouldn't be there to minimize the downside of high variance cards. I think they should be there to encourage high variance, if that kind of makes sense. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. The head, I want it to be Crown of Dominion, so I'll probably just base it around that. I think that's pretty fun. And the legs, from last week, I said there was a bit of a surprise to them. Well, this week, finally figured out how to, the wording isn't clean. But of course, like once these things are more finalized, I'll take the time and actually make sure that they work according to the rules. But the legs are gonna give you an intellect buff. So spoiler for the heroes, well, you can see here as well, they're all base 3 intellect. You're gonna have 4 intellect, but if you break your peg legs, then you're just like crawling around on the floor and you're down in intellect. You have a pretty strong equipment, but requires you to roll. You know, hypothetically, if you block with it every turn, every attack, if you're playing UPF or something, or you're playing PvE and you're playing against like a raid boss, you block with it every opportunity you can and you just roll, then like, it's gonna be insane. But you can, break it on turn 1 and essentially nerf yourself the entire game. So maybe you save it for later. So, there's some push and pull with the card. But the heroes. So the heroes, went over it last week. We have our undead, skeleton, whatever. We'll figure it out. Pirate, 3 intellect, just like the other pirate. So, gonna have to play the legs. Sorry. Undead pirate starts at 1 life. Whenever you take damage, you banish cards from the top of your deck. When you no longer have a deck, instead you can't prevent the damage anymore, and you would lose. Next time you would take lethal damage. Interesting. For a couple reasons, right? Like you can obviously do like unpreventable damage effects, so you could essentially kill whoever's playing this pirate turn 1 if you run like Vambrace or something like that, something along those lines. Shuko, whatever. Human pirate is more focused on treasure. Talked about treasure last week. These are just chests that enter the field. They are pretty expensive and they don't block. You can run any number that you want in your deck. So there is a push and pull of, do you want enough that you're going to consistently hit every turn, or do you want enough that you'll once in a while get it, but not too many to the point where you're just going to draw them in multiples and they're non-blocking cards. They don't really do a whole lot. But the hero pirate, like the human pirates, like trying to be a little bit more in the politics, being more into like group hugging effects, right? Some camaraderie. But you're still coming out, at your end of the deal. You're always profiting, things like that. So there's going to be card draw effects, things like that. But also, like, there's a lot of card draw effects in UPF. Like, people love running things like Gorg Tome. Good deeds don't go unnoticed. So, people play Valda in UPF for that reason. Like, you can do some pretty fun stuff with her. So why not, incorporate that idea into a hero? So bargain was a new keyword that I think I've kind of landed on. So we talked about last week, there's plunder. So there's ways to make coins, but the other end of the pirate identity is how do you spend coins? And bargain seems to be a pretty good solution. I honestly kind of wish they would incorporate this into like the assassin class. Like today, I saw the spoiler for, what is it? Dead Already? Something like that. Already Dead. The one where it's a 2 for 6 that banishes a defending card if it hits. Which is like pretty interesting because it shreds equipment, right? It destroys equipment. So I'm not saying it's a boring card, but I would like to see contract support that has more ways to spend the coins other than like the shriek knives, I think is what they're called. The ones that it's just another contract equipment you pay silver for. I think it'd be kind of cool to see more payoffs like outside of just the equipment. So bargain's like my attempt at that, right? So pretty simple. You can throw the keyword on stuff and like arguably like maybe it's a little too linear. You know, it gets the idea across, right? So whenever you play like an attack that has bargain, you can destroy a coin of your choice based on what coin you destroy. It's going to buff it based on whether it's a copper, silver, or gold. So 1, 2, or 3. The landmark, which was the shit from last week. DM Ramana, if you're here again, I agree. I don't really like putting an ally into everything, and I don't think that like a ship being an ally like makes a whole lot of sense. So this week we're trying a landmark instead. Probably going to be like a ship port, you know, marketplace, an island thing, something like that, right? You arrive there, so you play the landmark, and then at the start of every turn, you can destroy a coin of your choice. So as long as you have money to spend there, there's something to do. And so you run out of money, and then you gotta go hit the sea. So if you destroy a copper, and +2 damage to your first attack, so slightly better than a bargain rate. So because I mean you're playing a landmark, so it's probably gonna cost like 2 cards to play it. You know, I mean that's high opportunity cost, so the effect should be strong. Also, it's multiplayer, so the effect should be strong anyway. More exciting, interesting, and swingier games, so that games can end faster. Players are able to get multiple games in one play session, things like that. Destroying a silver gives you 2 resources. Destroying a gold gives you 2 cards. So basically cash in, right, as long as you have a gold to spend. So, I mean, they're all kind of mimicking some kind of effect. Maybe these could be all increased by 1. Maybe they're fine as is. Maybe there's something more interesting. But current idea is a landmark. You gotta be buying stuff every turn. So I like the idea that it's not optional. It's not just like a thing that sits there and you can like pay whenever you feel like it. It's like, you know, it's kind of creating some urgency to be, you know, interacting with the secondary resource system, which are the coins. Politics. These are hard. Politic cards in EDH, if you come from Magic, they take on a lot of different forms, but the problem is because it's a permanent based game, politics also happen with the actual board state. So like if you play with a casual group, so like I admittedly am actually pretty out of the loop. I have to like almost by proxy like watch people play casual EDH, because it's just like it's not really for me all that much. I liked playing CEDH when I was like at the tail end of, you know, like really playing paper Magic, but I still understand, you know, how it works, right? So I mean, part of the politics are the fact it's permanent based. So you play like a massive creature or, you know, an artifact, enchantment, something that can do something to somebody. And like, there's a surprising amount of games where someone will play an absolute haymaker creature, and sometimes it just sits there on the board, even if it's able to attack, for like a couple turns. Because part of the bargaining process is like, oh, I have this, and I just won't attack anybody if you all agree to like let me do something for a couple turns, right? Like I've seen, you know, deals like that. Harder in Fab because there's an opportunity cost to be playing all of your cards and you have an intellect. So it doesn't really make sense to be like, I'm just gonna hold 3 cards and do nothing if you just hold 3 cards and do nothing as well, right? Like that's not an interesting thing to have happen at the table. Now, if we all played allies like Dromai and I play like 4 dragons and I'm like, I'm not gonna attack with them if you just like let me like do something funny next turn, right? So I think politics and Fab are pretty difficult. Like Warmonger's Diplomacy, ironically, is like a really spiky 1v1 competitive card despite it being worded for multiplayer. I think politics are hard. I'm not entirely sure what makes them interesting in Fab just yet. Like the only effects I can think of are also effects that they made, which are just like group hug effects. So you have like good deeds don't go unnoticed, things like that. So I mean, these aren't inherently interesting, I think. I mean, they work with, you know, specifically like this pirate, like you want people drawing cards at the table so you're able to go digging for treasure. But outside of that, I mean, they're not really creating like any interesting incentive. So, I mean, like, we'll keep on working on these. I do like strings attached a little bit, like the ability to look at someone's hand and then have you each draw a card. So you first of all get to make a deal with someone. You and the other player are basically kind of even. I think if anything, this is a little too weak for you as the player playing it. So if it costs anything, you're looking at 2 cards for you to only draw 1 card and your opponent draws a card, but they didn't have to pay anything. So maybe they have to pay something if they want to draw a card. Maybe they have to discard something. That could honestly be interesting. Something like a codex effect, where if done properly, you don't discard, but your opponent does. but they can still, I guess, get something out of it. Being able to look at someone's hand does have pretty high like merit for multiplayer experiences. Maybe there's an effect that all players play face up for, you know, like a turn cycle, something like that. I don't really know. This is like the weakest part, which is also why there's just like something that's like barely even a card and then something that doesn't really work properly. RNG effects. Like I said before, I want you to roll scabs. I want it to be exciting. Like the problem with Brute most of the time, unless if you're playing KO, is that you have to roll, because if you don't roll, your deck is bad. And if you do roll, then your deck is like, okay, right? So like Levi's rates, ironically, compared to something like Lexi, are like barely even good if you roll hot on scabs. So the idea is that you have to roll, and Gambler's Gloves are there as a mitigation of, oh, if I roll a 1, I actually just lose the game instead. I don't really like that. I'm not really sure if it's solved in the Pirate class, but I think I want effects that lean in more into, oh, I actually want to roll because the effects are really cool. Cheat death. I mean, like, you can, it's tough. You can still argue it's a negative incentive, right? Like, oh, if I don't roll well, I literally lose the game. But I think the effects are, I'm trying to make them exciting enough that it's an incentive to be like, oh, I get to roll dice and do cool things, right? So cheat death, if you roll the 6, you don't take lethal that turn. Rusty Cannon is going to be like an overstat attack, probably like a 3 for 8. We could even go like a 3 for 9, basically. You could even overstat it up like that. So really strong, right? But I mean, like, comes to the downside. Fortunate Opportunity is kind of interesting. I don't even know if it needs to be a die roll effect or if it could just be something you could do. Die roll, I guess, maybe makes it a little bit more fun. But being able to equip equipment is kind of cool, right? If you're like looting someone from the table, something like that. It'd also be kind of interesting because it would give you a variable experience. Like, what does it mean if your pirate equips like Earthlore Bounty from Valda? But you get the idea. So there's some cool things you can do with it. Set sail, letting everyone roll a d6 and gain that many resources is pretty strong. Benefits you the most since you actually have the opportunity to use them on your turn. But depending on what other people have, there can also be instances where someone at the table maybe also benefits just as much from it. So if there's like a wizard player at the table, if there's someone who you end up attacking on that turn with all the resources who has like an expensive D-react or some kind of effect, then all of a sudden like it wasn't an entirely asymmetrical effect. So there's some symmetry to it and someone else benefits from the exchange. So that's it for the week. So just trying to hone in a little bit on core themes, mechanics, trying to figure out how to get better politics into UPF, how to make exciting effects, and how to make RNG effects that feel more rewarding rather than punishing, and incentivize exciting outcomes and incentives, essentially. If you'll be at the Battle Hardened, I'll see you this weekend. If not, I'll see you here next week. Until next time, thank you for watching.